A forklift lowered a scorched Marine V-12 onto the concrete 2 feet from Caleb Rourke's boots. The block landed with a sound like a church bell hit with a wrench. Drew Mackin folded his arms. "Fix it, Rourke. 28 days. Or pack your locker." The shop laughed. On the walkway above, Elena Halverson did not. Caleb knelt. He set his hand flat against the burned iron and listened to nothing for 4 seconds. Then he stood, nodded once, and said nothing. They thought they had handed a pile of scrap to the quietest mechanic on the floor. They had no idea the man kneeling there had drawn the first version of that engine. And in the next 28 days, that silence would force the building to learn his name. 4 weeks earlier, on a Friday morning in May, Caleb Rourke had walked his daughter Mia to Street Mary's Elementary at 7:45. She wore a red windbreaker over her soccer kit because practice was after school. She talked the whole way about a book she was reading, something with a girl detective and a missing dog. And Caleb listened without interrupting. At the corner of Prince George Street, he stopped and crouched down so they were eye level. "Miss Patterson picks you up at 3:15. And if it rains, she drives." "I know, Dad." He tapped her shoulder twice, the way he always did, and watched until she was through the gate before he turned and walked the 8 minutes to the shop. His apartment was small, 2 bedrooms above a coffee place on Maryland Avenue. The walls were painted the color of weak tea. There were her bookshelves and her cleats by the door and his work boots beside them. There was a kitchen table where they ate dinner most nights and a couch where they read. In his bedroom closet, on the top shelf, a wooden box held a single medal turned face down. The Society of Naval Architects and Marine Engineers Award, 2021, for innovation in diesel turbocharger design. He had not looked at it in 3 years. The Halverson shop was a wide rectangular building near the city dock. It built and rebuilt marine diesel engines for sport yachts, fishing fleets, and small Coast Guard patrol craft. Caleb worked days, a regular shift, sweeping in at 7:50 and clocking out at 4. That morning, he had a transmission on his bench that 3 day shift engineers had given up on. The torque on the input shaft was off by a few thousandths, and none of them had been willing to call it by feel. Caleb did not use a torque indicator. He ran his thumb along the splined hub, found the wrong tooth, marked it with chalk, and rebuilt the assembly in 90 minutes. When he was done, he wrote the work order under old Hollis's name. Hollis was the foreman, 62, a former Navy machinist mate, who walked with a slight list to starboard from an old shipyard injury. They had an agreement. Caleb's name did not go on paperwork. Hollis took the signature line. Hollis came by the bench at lunch. He looked at the transmission. He looked at Caleb. "Why, you really hiding, son?" "I'm not hiding," Caleb said. "I'm resting." Hollis did not press. He never did. The flashback was brief. The kind of memory that arrived without warning when Caleb tightened a particular type of fastener. 3 years ago, Brennan Marine Systems in Norfolk. A glass conference room. Marcus Vale is program director, sliding a revised schedule across the table. The salt fog cycle had been cut from the propeller shaft validation for the Sentinel class. Vale's reasoning was the schedule. Vale's leverage was the medical bills. Caleb's wife had been 6 months into stage 4. Vale knew it. Vale used it. Caleb signed his refusal in pen, walked out, filed the non-disclosure agreement, and never went back. She died 6 months later. He moved Mia to Annapolis because it was 40 miles from Norfolk, and nobody in the industry would think to look in a marine shop that rebuilt yacht engines. Friday after work, he picked Mia up from soccer practice at the rec field by the bay. She came running up holding her shoes. She had scored. He lifted her once off the ground, set her back down, and they walked home with her chattering about the goal. He listened. That was what he did now. 3 weeks before the engine hit the floor, Elena Halverson chaired the contract review on the Voltaran VX9 program. The deal was $180 million over 4 years to supply marine diesel power plants to Voltaran Yachts, a Miami builder of high-performance sport craft. The first delivery window was tight. The penalty for missing it was $40 million. Drew Mackin, her chief technology officer, presented a 40-page report on the V-12 Marine prototype, designated V-12M, 200 hours of bench testing. All parameters green. Production go. Elena signed off. She did not see Nora Greaves's jaw tighten across the table. That night, Nora sent Elena a private email at 10:40. It was 4 lines. Drew skipped the salt fog cycle on the prototype. I want it on record. I asked twice. He overruled QA. Elena read the email at 11. She started. She did not reply. She trusted Nora. She also trusted Drew because Drew had been her father's right hand for 19 years. Nora did not sleep well that night. She had logged objections before, on smaller programs, and Drew had always smoothed them over with the engineering committee. This time she had filed the complaint in writing with a timestamp on a contract that carried a $40 million penalty clause. She knew what that meant. If the program failed, the email was either her shield or the document that ended her career. Down on the floor, after most of the shop had gone home, Caleb walked past the bench test cell on his way out. The V-12M was running its evening soak. He stopped for 4 seconds. He did not look at the gauges. He listened. On the 3rd cycle of every revolution, somewhere deep in cylinder 7, there was a beat that arrived a fraction of a second late, the kind of resonance offset that no production sensor would flag, because it sat below the noise floor, the kind that a man who had designed the architecture from scratch could hear the way a piano tuner hears a wolf tone. The next morning, a sheet of yellow paper appeared on the foreman's clipboard. No signature. The handwriting was square and small. Bearing tolerance. Cylinder 7. Resonance off spec. Check before salt fog. Drew found it at 10. He read it twice. He balled it up and threw it in the trash. Some grease monkey thinks he's an engineer, he said to nobody. But that night he sat at his terminal and revised the validation plan. He pulled the salt fog cycle off the schedule. If salt fog ran on the prototype, the cheap bearing lot from Tidewater would fail visibly. He could not have that. He also pulled the access log from the loading dock camera. 4 men had walked past the test cell during the soak window. He wrote the 4 names on a sticky note. Caleb Rourke was at the top. 2 weeks later, the prototype burned. It happened in open water on a clear morning. The V-12M went into a bench-to-boat sea trial, fitted in a Voltaran demo hull. 22 minutes in, cylinder 7 seized. The combustion chamber ruptured. 2 crew got off the deck in time. The engine cooked itself before the Coast Guard arrived. $2.1 million in damage. No injuries. Voltaran issued a 48-hour cease and review notice and put 2 of their executives on a plane to Annapolis. Drew had 18 hours before Elena flew to Miami. He needed a scapegoat that fit. He had the sticky note. He had the anonymous tip. He had a shop full of men who already saw Caleb as the quiet one, who never spoke up and never said why he wouldn't. He chose the burned engine itself. He knew what nobody else knew about it. The salt had been in the cooling jacket for 9 hours before recovery. The combustion chamber was warped. No yard mechanic could rebuild a V-12 Marine block in 28 days. The whole gag was a guaranteed failure with a punchline at the end. Caleb would miss the deadline. Drew would have his paperwork. Caleb would be gone before Elena got back from Miami. The forklift came down. The block hit the concrete. The torn blueprints landed beside it. Drew let the laughter run. Then he leaned in close enough that only Caleb could hear. You wrote that little note, didn't you? Want to play engineer? Here's your chance. Caleb did not confirm. He did not deny. Up on the walkway, Nora spoke without turning her head. This isn't discipline, Elena. This is theater. Elena did not look away from the floor. Let it run, she said quietly. I want to see what he does. It was not cruelty. It was diagnosis. From where she stood, she could see 2 men at once. She had read Nora's email 3 times that morning. She had watched Drew lie his way through a board call the day before. She was not going to make a move until she understood who was lying about what. Nora turned to her. If you let him fail in public, he walks, probably to a competitor. And if I save him now, I never see what he actually is. Elena did not look away from the floor. Drew picked the engine. I want to know why he picked this one. Nora said nothing. She had been asking herself the same question for an hour. Caleb stood up. He nodded to Hollis to come help with the forklift. As he walked past Drew, he paused for half a second. He spoke too low for anyone else to catch. 28 days is generous. Drew's mouth flattened. He held the look on his face for the room. But for one beat, his color went. Caleb pushed the forklift to the abandoned bay at the back of the shop, the one that had been mothballed when Halverson stopped doing military overhauls in 2016. Hollis followed with the keys. That night, after the shop emptied, Hollis stood at the door of the old bay with a ring of keys in his hand. Caleb was already pulling the engine cover. Hollis cleared his throat. You take this on, you sign your name to it. Not mine. Not this time. Caleb did not turn around. He set the cover on a clean rag. After a long pause, he said, all right, that was the agreement. For the first 3 nights, he did not turn a wrench on assembly. He disassembled. 612 parts came off the block and were laid out on 3 folding tables in the order they had failed. Not the order they came off, the order they had failed. Each piece got a strip of colored tape. Red for primary failure, yellow for secondary damage, blue for tertiary. It was a forensic method that Hollis had seen described once in a Navy training manual attributed to a defense program protocol. He stood in the doorway on the 4th night with 2 coffees and watched Caleb measure a crankshaft journal with a length of taut wire and a flashlight. Hollis knew that trick. He had read about it once, in a feature in Marine Engineering Quarterly, 2021. The piece had profiled an engineer named C. Rourke at Brennan Marine. It had described the wire method, applied to a crankshaft, as if it were a parlor magic act. Hollis had cut the page out and kept it. The next morning, Hollis went to the records room. He printed the article fresh. He folded it and put it in his locker. He did not say a word to Caleb. He decided to wait. Friday afternoon, Mia came by after practice. Hollis let her in. She walked up to the engine and looked at it for 5 full seconds. She was not impressed, and she was not scared. She was 9, and the engine was just a thing. Daddy? Is this the one they laughed at? It is. Then make it loud. She took the sandwich. Hollis handed her and sat on a stool by the door. On the 8th day, a man named Tyler came by the bay. Tyler was 26, an engineer on Drew's team, and he had been with the laughing crowd the day the engine hit the floor. He leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed. Still playing with that scrap, old man? Caleb did not look up. He kept his eyes on the part he was checking. Your torque spec on cylinder 7 is wrong, he said. Always was. Check the supplier's data sheet against the build sheet. The bolts they shipped you are not the bolts on the print. Tyler started to laugh. Then he stopped. He stood in the doorway another full second. Then he turned and walked back to his bench. By the end of the shift, he had pulled both documents. The torque value on the build sheet was 86 foot-pounds. The supplier's actual fastener was rated for 72. He sat at his desk staring at the spread for 10 minutes. He did not tell Drew. He was too embarrassed. But he started watching Caleb. That same week, Caleb walked across the shop to Nora's office. He knocked. She looked up from her monitor. Mr. Rourke, could I get a copy of the salt fog QA logs on the V12 prototypes? I want to understand the failure pattern. Nora looked at him over her glasses. Mechanics did not ask for QA logs. She did not ask why. She slid a thumb drive across the desk a minute later. Bring it back when you're done. He nodded. He left. Nora sat at her desk for a long time after he was gone. She had been watching the quiet man for 2 weeks. The questions she had about him had multiplied. On day 9, a Tuesday, the second prototype seized. Not as bad as the first. This one fouled a propeller shaft in test water, lost a sea trial in the bay, had to be towed back to the city dock under a fog of black exhaust. Voltaran sent a second letter, 19 days to a third-party certified fix, or the contract void with the $40 million penalty. The emergency meeting ran 2 hours. Drew blamed German bearings. Drew proposed a supplier swap. Drew said the original bench vibration log was corrupted in a routine archive rewrite. Nora stood up in the middle of his explanation. Elena, I logged that the salt fog cycle was skipped 3 weeks ago. It's in my email. Drew did not even pause, and I overruled it. That's my call as CTO. We were on schedule. Elena did not speak. She wrote a single word in her notebook. She watched Drew watching her. He had just told a room of 9 people that he had personally overridden a safety protocol that 2 prototypes had failed because of. He had said it like it was a tax decision. That night at 21:47, Caleb walked down to the basement server room. He had a valid access badge for the technician group. Hollis had loaned him the shared account credentials for the diagnostic backups, which was permitted under shop policy and which 3 people used. Caleb logged in during posted working hours on his own clock. He did not exceed his access level. He went straight to a partition Drew had forgotten to scrub. The 90-day rolling backup. The original bench vibration logs were sitting there, untouched. He copied them to a personal thumb drive. Then he opened his email and sent an encrypted second copy to his attorney in Norfolk. The attorney was a man named David Reyes, who had handled Caleb's exit from Brennan 3 years before and had kept his retainer current. The subject line was 4 words. For the record only, this was not a frightened man hoarding evidence. This was a man who had read the rulebook once and had not forgotten what was in it. Drew checked the server room camera the next morning. He saw the timestamp. He could not narrow it past 3 names because of the shared credential. He printed the list. He stared at it for a long time. Caleb Rourke was at the top. The next morning, Caleb arrived at his locker and found the padlock cut. Nothing inside was missing. His tools were arranged neatly, the way they always were, but taped to the inside of the door was a yellow sheet of paper. 3 words in blue ink. Stop digging, Rourke. The handwriting was square and small. The same hand that had signed 43 internal memos that Caleb had read in passing over the last 2 months. Caleb pulled the note off the door. He folded it twice. He put it in his shirt pocket. He did not show it to Hollis. He did not show it to Nora. He drove home that night, set it on the kitchen counter, and photographed it with his phone. Then he sent the photograph to David Reyes. The reply came 40 minutes later. Keep it sealed. Original goes in a paper envelope. Sign and date the back. We have chain of custody now. On day 14, Elena Halverson walked down to the shop floor for the first time in 6 months. She did not announce it. She came in through the side door used by the parts deliveries. She walked a long way around so she could see the abandoned bay. She had 2 reasons. The first was a spreadsheet Nora had emailed her that morning. The official QA report on the V12 prototypes. Next to it, side by side, the email Nora had sent 3 weeks earlier. The salt fog notation had been deleted from the official version. Somebody had reached into the QA archive and rewritten history. The second reason was the man in the back bay. She found him at a folding table laying a connecting rod into a torque fixture. The bay was clean the way an operating room is clean. The floor had been swept. The parts were laid in colored ranks. A hand-drawn schematic was tacked to the wall. A 40 by 28-inch sheet of paper covered in the kind of fine pencil notation she had seen exactly once in her life. In a wind tunnel report at a graduate seminar at MIT, she stood in the doorway for 10 seconds before he noticed her. He set the rod down. He stood up. He did not wipe his hands. Miss Halverson, Mr. Rourke. She walked closer. How far along? 74% reassembled. Bench ready in 5 days. Without parts orders? I'm reusing what survives. Remachining what doesn't. Hollis has a lathe in this bay. She looked at the schematic. She looked at him. She had spent enough time around her father's old engineers to know what the notation style was. The block letters. The decimal margins. The torque tolerance in the right-hand column, written to 4 places. What's your spec on this build? He answered without hesitating. MILSTD 1399. Section 330. Type 1. He paused. An ABSA-1 Marine classification. The Voltaran contract requires the second. The first is what the engine was originally designed against. She was quiet for a long beat. A shop mechanic doesn't know. MILSTD 1399. No, Mao. Who were you before you walked into my shop, Mr. Rourke? He looked at her. His eyes were gray-green and very steady. Someone who already learned what happens when the wrong engine ships, ma'am. She did not push. She turned to leave. At the doorway, she paused with her hand on the frame and looked back. Drew told me you tampered with the server. I accessed a backup partition with valid credentials in working hours. Check the access log. Then check what's in the backup. She held his eyes for 2 seconds. Then she walked out. That afternoon, she sat in her office and did 3 things. She pulled the badge log herself. She read the partition that Caleb had accessed, and she called Drew Mackin into her office and asked him to explain why a backup he had described as corrupted was sitting on the basement server, time-stamped and intact. Drew talked for 9 minutes. Elena listened. She let him leave. That evening, Drew called Voltaran directly. He proposed accelerating the final demonstration to recover schedule. Day 19. Not day 28. Voltaran agreed within an hour. He sent the update to Elena at 8 in the evening. The new demonstration date was less than 5 days away. Hollis told Caleb the news at 2200. Caleb was at the bench fitting an oil pump. He did not stop working. He listened to the schedule change in full. Bench test cell still available? Hollis booked it Friday night. Then we test Friday night. He drove home. Mia was already in bed. He stood in the kitchen and opened his laptop. There was an email from David Reyes waiting. The subject line was 3 words. Read this immediately. The body was a single paragraph. Brennan Marine had been acquired by Voltaran's parent holding company that morning. The deal had closed at noon. The change of control clause in Caleb's 3-year-old non-disclosure agreement had been triggered. As of 2 p.m. Eastern Time, his confidentiality obligations to Brennan no longer ran to the original signatory. They now ran to Voltaran, which meant that the original signatory could no longer enforce silence about anything that had happened before the closing, and which meant that anything Caleb had refused to sign 3 years ago was suddenly sayable in public. Caleb stood at the kitchen counter for a long minute. He read it twice. Then he closed the laptop. He went to bed. Day 18. 4 in the morning. The shop was dark except for the back bay. Caleb cranked the V12M for the first time since reassembly. The engine caught on the second compression stroke. It idled at 600 RPM without a hiccup. He brought it up through the power band. He let it sit at half load for 20 minutes. He hit it with the variable transient cycle that nobody at Halverson had run on the production prototype. The block did not flinch. Hollis stood next to the gauges, watching the dyno output. The power figure was 9.4% above the production prototype's best run. The vibration trace was textbook. He let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. He walked to his locker. He came back with the article from Marine Engineering Quarterly. He laid it on the workbench, next to Caleb's hand. "You're him," he said. "Brennan's chief. The one who walked out before the Sentinel-class trials." Caleb looked at the page. He nodded once. "Why?" Caleb wiped his hands on a rag. He thought about the question for a long moment. There was a man named Marcus Vale. He was my program director. He wanted me to sign off on a redesigned prop shaft for the Sentinel class. He wanted to skip the salt fog cycle, to make the delivery date, and my wife was in the last stages of cancer. The medical leave I needed was discretionary. Vale held it over me. I signed my refusal in writing instead. The same day I filed the non-disclosure and walked out. 6 months later, the Sentinel-class prop shaft failed in trials. 2 sailors went overboard. Nobody died. Vale got moved sideways. He never got charged because I had signed the NDA, and I never opened my mouth. Hollis did not speak. My wife died 8 days after the trial. I had Mia. I had nothing else. Why didn't you talk then? Because she was dying, and our daughter needed one parent left standing. Hollis nodded slowly. He folded the article and slid it back into his shirt pocket. That night, Caleb sat at his kitchen table with his laptop. He had Nora on a video call. Nora had pulled the bearing supplier records for the V12 program at his request. They went through them together, line by line. The bearings on the production prototypes had not come from the German vendor. They had come from a company named Tidewater Bearings LLC, based in Suffolk, Virginia. The company had been incorporated 4 years before. The principal officer of record was a man named Marcus Vale, the same Marcus Vale. Caleb sat back from the screen. He pressed his hand flat against his chest. Nora spoke after a long silence. Drew and Vale have been partners for at least 3 years. This is in Halverson. This is a ring. It's 3 yards. Brennan, Halverson, and at least one more. Vale places his bearings in everyone. Drew signs the purchase orders. The price differential gets split. They've been running it long enough to know how to bury the paper. And Voltaran just bought Brennan, which means if Voltaran signs Halverson, Vale controls 3 suppliers and a buyer. He becomes a single point of failure for half the East Coast Marine fleet. Nora was very quiet. Caleb, if you put this on the table tomorrow, you're not just blowing Drew. You're blowing a federal-grade fraud ring. He nodded slowly. Then we make sure the room is the right room. He hung up at 4:15 in the morning. He called David Reyes at 5. He asked for one specific thing. Reyes did not answer right away. The line was quiet for a long beat. Caleb, you sure? I should have been sure 3 years ago. Reyes made a call to a contact at the FBI's Maritime Fraud Unit in Baltimore. He framed the request to Voltaran as an independent audit by a federal compliance observer, offered as a goodwill gesture in light of recent incident reports. Voltaran accepted before they understood what they had accepted. The Day 19 demonstration was set for 2 in the afternoon at the Halverson main demonstration floor. Voltaran sent 4 executives up from Miami on the corporate plane. Marcus Vale came with them, in his new role as a representative of the parent holding company that now owned Brennan. He arrived in a Navy suit. He shook hands with Drew Mackin like the world was the size of 2 men in a contract. Caleb wore the same shop coveralls he had worn every day for 2 years. He stood at the side of the floor with Hollis and Nora. Mia was at school. 2 men in dark suits sat in the second-to-last row of folding chairs. Nobody knew who they were. Drew ran his demonstration first. The official V12M production prototype was wheeled out on a roller stand. He fired it up. It ran cleanly for 12 minutes at constant load. The Voltaran executives nodded. Drew turned to the floor and smiled in Caleb's direction. Now, for our entertainment portion of the afternoon. Let's see what our shop hand built. Show us your scrap, Rourke. The shop laughed. The laugh was thinner than the one in June. A few engineers did not join. Caleb walked to the back bay with Hollis. They wheeled out the rebuilt engine on a cradle. The block had been remachined, repainted in Halverson gray, and labeled with a single line of white stenciling on the side. Our prototype won. He started it. It caught on the first stroke. It came up through the power band without a stumble. He held it at half load. He brought it to 3/4. He ran the variable transient cycle, the same one he had run alone in the back bay at 4 a.m. 4 days earlier. The dyno trace went up on the wall display. It was a clean rolling line. The Voltaran chief executive, a woman named Helena Cortez, stood up. She walked across the floor. She put her hand on the engine block and held it there, the way a doctor takes a pulse. Who built this? Caleb stood at parade rest. The same engineer who wrote the original architecture all of you have been copying wrong for 3 years. The room went silent. Drew's color drained. Marcus Vale, who had been studying his phone, looked up for the first time. His eyes locked on Caleb's face. The recognition came in stages. First puzzlement, then a single short blink, then white. Elena rose from her seat in the front row. She stepped forward. Mr. Rourke, for the record, would you state your full credentials? Caleb Rourke, Principal Engineer, Brennan Marine Systems, Sentinel Class Program, 2018 through 2023, Society of Naval Architects and Marine Engineers Innovation Award, 2021, for the original turbocharger architecture in this engine. The design you have all been licensing in its 3rd iteration is my design. Vale stood up so fast his chair scraped. He is bound by a non-disclosure agreement. Anything he says about Brennan property is inadmissible. Caleb did not raise his voice. The non-disclosure was voided when Voltaran's parent acquired Brennan and triggered the change of control clause. My attorney filed notice yesterday afternoon. The agreement is no longer enforceable by the original signatory. He turned to Elena. He held out a small black thumb drive. Miss Halverson, before anyone signs anything today, the room needs to see what is on this, and the two gentlemen in the second to last row may want to see it first. The two men in dark suits stood up. They walked to the front of the room. They opened leather wallets. They held up FBI credentials. Nobody breathed. Elena took the thumb drive. She walked to the projector console. She plugged it in. 3 folders opened on the screen, labeled in Caleb's blocky handwriting from the file names. He had numbered them. She opened the first folder. A bench vibration log displayed against a calibration trace. The deviation was clearly marked. A small annotation in the corner read Salt Fog Skip per D. Mackin, Ref. Email thread attached. The email thread came up next. 3 of them. All signed by Drew. All requesting that the salt fog cycle be removed from the validation plan to preserve schedule. All time-stamped before the first prototype failure. She opened the second folder. A purchase order. $6.2 million in bearing inventory delivered to Halverson Marine Engines from a vendor named Tidewater Bearings LLC, the principal officer of record on the corporate filing. A printout attached. The name Marcus Vale in 12-point type. The signature authorizing the purchase order on the Halverson side. Drew Mackin. Helena Cortez of Voltaran turned her head a quarter inch and looked at Drew. Then at Vale. Her face did not move. Her voice was very quiet. You are going to put my drivers in boats with these engines. Drew opened his mouth. He tried to speak. Elena opened the third folder, a scanned email from 3 years before. A request from Marcus Vale to Caleb Rourke at Brennan Marine to certify a propeller shaft redesign with a shortened salt fog cycle. Caleb's written refusal underneath, filed as a formal dissent, not covered by the non-disclosure, because it was an official engineering dissent on record with the company's compliance office. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Drew spoke first. His voice was thin. He's an industrial spy. He came in here to steal. Elena cut him off without looking at him, then explained why his rebuild outperforms yours by 9.4%. On the engine you said was unfixable in 28 days. Drew had no answer. The FBI agents walked to the front of the room. They asked Drew Mackin to come with them. They asked Marcus Vale to come with them. Vale did not resist. As he passed Caleb, he stopped for one moment. You finally talked, he said. Caleb met his eyes. You finally ran out of people I could lose by staying quiet. Vale walked out between the two agents. Drew followed. The room held its breath until the door closed behind them. Then, a single chair scraped. Then, another. Helena Cortez turned to Elena. We will need to talk. My office, Elena said. In 20 minutes. She turned and walked to Caleb. She stopped half a meter from him. She did not raise her voice. The room around them was still listening. You let me watch them humiliate you for 28 days. He did not look away. You needed to see who was lying. You couldn't see it from up there. She held the look for a long moment. Then she nodded once. It was not yet trust. It was respect. In her office 20 minutes later, with Helena Cortez across the table and Nora at her side, Elena renegotiated. Voltaran would not sign the contract under the existing program leadership. The condition was direct. The V-12M program would be led by Caleb Rourke, or there was no contract. Cortez wrote the condition in by hand on the cover sheet. Elena countersigned. Nora was promoted to Vice President of Quality and Compliance the same afternoon. The position was created on the spot. The first thing she did was order an internal audit of every supplier contract Drew Mackin had signed in the last 5 years. Hollis was offered a raise he refused. Caleb labeled the back bay Hollis Bay in white paint the next morning. Hollis pretended to be annoyed for about an hour. Caleb accepted the program leadership on one condition. He worked 4 days a week. He picked Mia up from school at 3 on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Elena agreed without thinking about it. The Sentinel class case was reopened the following week. The FBI used the evidence Caleb had handed over as the foundation for a federal grand jury investigation into procurement fraud across 3 East Coast Marine yards. Marcus Vail was indicted on 6 counts. Drew Mackin entered into a cooperation agreement and pled to 2. A week later, Caleb cleared his old workbench in the day shift area. Tyler walked over with a coffee. He set it on the bench. He did not say anything. Caleb nodded. Tyler nodded back. He walked away. Hollis brought a cardboard box from his locker. Inside was the magazine article. He set it on Caleb's new desk in the back bay. He stood in the doorway. "Put it up, son." Caleb did not answer right away. He looked at the page. Then he walked to his apartment that night, opened the box on the top shelf of the closet, and took out the medal. He brought it back to the shop in the morning. He hung the article and the medal side by side on the wall above his drafting table. It was the first time in 3 years he had let them be seen. Mia visited the shop on a Friday afternoon. Hollis taught her how to read a dyno chart. Nora brought her a hard hat with her name written on the band in silver paint. Mia kept it. She wore it home on the bus, and Caleb let her. On Wednesday, Caleb sat for a deposition in Baltimore. 2 federal prosecutors took him through the Sentinel class file for 4 hours. He did not embellish. He spoke when asked, and he stopped when finished. The lead attorney walked him to the elevator afterward. She told him the case would carry. He nodded once and left. Elena came down to the bay at the end of the day on Friday. She brought 2 cups of black coffee. She did not knock. She set the cups on the desk and sat in the folding chair across from him. The light through the high windows had gone gold. "Next prototype review," she said. "I'd like you in the room." "Not on the floor." He nodded. She paused. "And I owe you an apology for the balcony." He shook his head. "You owed it to the engine. Not to me. You paid it today." She held his eyes for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee. She stayed in the folding chair another 20 minutes. They talked about the program. They talked about nothing in particular. The shop emptied around them. At 6, she walked him out. Mia was waiting in the lobby with her soccer ball under her arm. She waved when she saw her father. Caleb walked toward her. Elena stood at the front desk and watched them through the glass. Mia ran ahead across the parking lot toward the car. Caleb followed at a walk. Elena stayed at the window. She did not cross her arms this time. Neither of them had been looking for what they found in a man who had once let a dead engine sit at his feet without flinching.